Black Sunday. So here's an interesting idea. You've heard me say before that you have no rights. Rights don't exist. Well, in a related note, I want to speak to you about morality. See, morality doesn't exist. Now, one caveat. Just like houses, just like cars, the construct that we call morality certainly exists, but it's a construct. It's not a natural phenomenon, natural fact, whatever. It's our way of putting control in the universe. See, as life forms, the universe is inherently chaotic. Entropy rules. And everything is pushing towards a lower state of energy. Nothing wants to expend energy. Apparently energy is very, very precious, and we don't want to spend it. Universe is very Jewish. Racist joke. But the thing is that life tends to want to organize. There's a lot of attraction, and that attraction leads to constructs, and constructs leads to all sorts of systems and organizations, and eventually organisms, and what is now life. And so one could easily say that the construct of morality exists. We can observe that most species, most living beings have some kind of scripted behavioral patterns and accepted behavioral patterns, certain lines that we follow. But it is not an objective reality, because the ideas of morality are very subjective to each thing. And one person put it, and he disagreed with me on the objective nature of morality. But he said, if you want to say that morality is not separate from the moral agent, fine. Well, yeah, it absolutely isn't. But that, in and of itself, makes it subjective. If morality is tied to an agent, then it is, in fact, subjective. I would say the tenets of the morality, or what's the word I used? I don't remember it, I'm not going to labor over it. But the idea behind morality, each of the components, the ideas that we place in as moral, are culturally subjective, individually subjective, belief system subjective. That's why we have so many disagreeing religions, so many disagreeing politics. Are there certain trends? Absolutely. Life seems to want to keep on living. So generally speaking, it's nearly universal that life should be preserved. And most things like to be able to trust other things, and so trust tends to be one of those things that we like to preserve. But it's not across the board. There are some who believe that those things have fundamentally no value and are willing to live their life without them, and that's their own moral code. If you look at the psychological definition of morality, it really is kind of a group agreement kind of thing, but then you're dealing with very small cells of groups, within pockets of culture, saying, well, we agree on this set, well, we agree on this set. And there may be some overlap, there always is. There's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, I don't even disagree that life should be preserved, or that trust should be preserved, or any of some of the finer points. I don't necessarily disagree with those. But I want you to understand that there is no natural law, no natural order that says this is the way things are, this is the way things should be. There simply isn't. There are plenty of times where you can justify initiating force against another thing. There are plenty of times when you can justify lying or being dishonest or deceiving. And you may say, well, justification does not equal morality. Maybe. But what I'm telling you is that there is no natural law, there is no natural order that says these things are good or bad. You have to understand that morality is the judgment, is the system of good and bad. These are not concrete ideas. Nature is not good or bad. There is no good or bad. There is simply what is. That's it. And we can within some sense of reason, we can observe the tendencies, the desires, the costs and benefit. I'm a big fan of cost and benefit observation and analysis. We can look at these things and determine what seems to be the most beneficial for the least cost. We can determine what will be useful for those that we care about, for the most people involved, because, you know, the cost-benefit analysis is a very useful tool. It's a very utilitarian tool. And I'm all for that, because life being inherently meaningless, life being inherently cyclical, self-serving, life exists to exist. There is no fundamental meaning in life. It's entirely subjective. Then it makes sense to just do what makes sense. And this is why I will tell you, and I mentioned this again, I mentioned it before, you can do whatever you can get away with. Now, risk assessment is one part, but the other part of it also is understanding that whatever you do can be done to you as well. And reciprocation, especially when you get caught, is a very strong tendency, especially for humans, but for animals in general. Reciprocation tends to happen a lot. So that old golden rule of don't do anything that you don't want done to you, treat others how you wish to be treated yourself. There's a reason we call it the golden rule, because it's a simple way of saying what we're all looking for. Be free, live freely, do what you want, but don't mess with other people. Because as soon as you start messing with other people's livelihoods, their lives, their pleasure, their freedom, they're going to become contentious, contemptuous, and resentful. And then you're going to start having stress and conflict. And we know that stress is a killer. Stress shortens our lifespan. And that's a bad thing. Stress, now, what I mean is distress. Remember, in psychology, there's eustress and distress. And eustress is the positive stress. It is the dosing of stress that is enough to help us grow, provided adequate recovery and fuel. And then there's distress, which is going to be over and above that level. It's kind of redlining all the time kind of idea. Distress is what I'm talking about here. Stress is a horrible term. It's been so misused. Anyway. But we know that distress, it is something that actually physically shortens our lives. It damages our cell biology, the reproduction, cellular reproduction. It damages our telomere transmission from one cell to the next, worse than normal. It damages our calm, which leads to psychological problems. There are so many problems with distress, and we need to get to a point where we can live in a way that we are not only fulfilling our freedom, our pleasure, our desire, our personal growth and development, but also doing so in such a way that we're not causing others distress, because when we cause others distress, they will begin to cause us distress. I feel distress by the people who are not living up to their own potentials, people who aggravate me because they are willfully ignorant. I'm not doing anything specifically to them, and they're not even specifically interacting with me. It's just general social interaction. They happen to be there in the same vicinity as me, and it aggravates me. And that aggravation leads me to feeling a little spiteful, a little angry. And that anger, it distracts me from the rest of everything that I'm doing. It causes a psychological stress, which causes physiological responses, which then takes away from my productivity, which takes away from my ability to work out, to focus on my writing, on meditating, anything like that. And the next thing you know, I've wasted several hours of my day because I let myself get stressed out by something that wasn't even directly affecting me. So understand that, while that is largely, and in this case, in this example, while that is largely something that I can work on myself, it is, in fact, a good example of how we all affect each other. And, I mentioned the other day on Facebook that I am, what did I say? I'm a cynical, pessimistic, arrogant narcissist. And it's true, I am. And a friend of mine, my oldest friend, I've known him longer than anybody except for blood relatives, said, and sometimes I hate you for it. And I understand that. Because dealing with somebody who is constantly negative, remember our discussion on negativity, it's important, it's a defining part of life. It is the shadows that define the light. But remember that like an electron, the same charge as the proton, it weighs so much less. It means that the gravity, the weight, the force of negativity, to get the same effect, takes so much less. Negativity is defining, it's potent, but it needs to be done in moderation, and I tend to overdo it. And when you come across people like that, when you come across people like me, who get aggravated at all these things that are not ideal and not perfect, at people who just don't get it, it tends to wear on you. My wife tells me this all the time. My negativity is tiresome. And while I don't think my negativity is necessarily a bad thing, I will say that I do tend to let it spread too much. I don't contain it enough. And so in that case, I am allowing my distress to distress others. And that's bad form. And so if you take anything from this, take this from me, that you need to work on not letting your distress others. You need to work on letting others not distress you. You need to, in some ways, isolate yourself, at least emotionally, psychologically, from some of those stressors. Become a little more stoic. It's the hardest thing in the world, but become a little more stoic about it. Just let what is be. Stop allowing these things to be able to consume your time. This is as much a lesson for me as it is for anybody else. But understand that your morality, the things that you determine that are good and bad, are in your own hands. But understand that all of it has a cost and has a benefit. And start figuring out where the cost and benefit lies. Because there is no better judge of good and bad than your own valuation of cost and benefit. At least for now. That may change. I don't know. I don't have all the answers. But I will talk to you guys later, and good journey.